All right, welcome back. We are going to talk about the United States Congress. I'm going to be walking you through Article 1, which sets up the legislative branch, making some comments, pointing out a few things in the hopes that you might learn something. So, Roll Call, which is a channel that in a paper that covers Capitol Hill puts out these congressional hits and misses, which just are legislators and sometimes the president, sometimes the courts, acting silly. It's fun to watch. At least I think so. I'm a nerd, though, so you might not, but there's a link to it if you so desire to watch it. Not requiring it or anything. So, the U.S. House and Senate have all legislative power. This is separation of power. Remember, the president has executive power, all executive power. The courts have all judicial power. The president enforces the law that Congress writes. Congress makes the law. The judicial branch, the courts, adjudicate the law. Separation of power there. So House members are elected every second year in the even years by the people of the several states. Now there's more than several states now. Representatives have to be 25 years old. They have been a citizen of the U.S. for 7 years, and they have to live in the state where he or she is elected. Do they have to live in the state for X number of years? No. They can really just move in. Well, I'm not familiar with all the election laws of all the 50 states, but they can move in the time required prior to an election to establish residency, and that's it. That's called carpetbagging, or it used to be anyway. But the requirements to be a representative, 25 years old, have been a citizen of the U.S. for 7 years, and must live in the state where he or she is elected. That will certainly be on your next test. Remember that. And the electors in each state shall have the qualifications requisite for electors of the most numerous branch of the state legislature. And that's just 18th century speak for everybody who is qualified to vote for a representative is going to be allowed to do so. That's all. So each state will have at least one U.S. representative, and there are several states that do. Wyoming has only one U.S. representative. Montana, very low populations. But if you notice, the number of representatives in the House is determined by the census. At least one representative for every 30,000 people. Now, are representatives today representing only 30,000 people? No. Could be anywhere. I'm just ballparking it here. Just don't quote me on the numbers from 150,000 to maybe 300,000 people, probably more. This is because of the Permanent Apportionment Act, which is linked here. You can read about that at your leisure. I would read about it at my leisure if I was a student in this class. So basically, in 1929, Congress decided that the House was going to be capped at 435 members because some states felt as though they were getting the short end of the stick after a census count in terms of representation. So now you're familiar with what happens. The census is taken, seats are apportioned in the House of Representatives based on how populated or not a state is, and that's that. We lost in Illinois, we lost a House seat. We're down from 18 to 17. And when vacancies happen in the representation from any state, the executive authority thereof shall issue writs of election to fill such vacancies. Okay, all that means is the governor, the executive, is going to schedule a special election to figure out what person is going to fill the term of the representative who might have died, become incapacitated, just simply resigned. That's what happened. The representatives are meant to be closer to meant to work for us. Really, well, the whole government's meant to work for us, but so a special election needs to be held to figure out what we want. The House will choose its speaker, and boy, did the House choose its speaker this last time. And other officers, the House will have the sole power of impeachment. Now we'll get to this in a little bit. But just for now, remember, impeachment, the House just decides what the president or other federal government employee, you can go all the way down to a federal judge, even lower too, but they just don't impeach presidents. So the House writes up what they think that individual has done wrong, and then the Speaker marches that bill of particulars over to the Senate. The Senate sets up a trial, and 100 senators act as jurors. And if the person who's being impeached is found guilty of the crimes that the House of Representatives accuses him of, then they're simply removed from office. That's all an impeachment does, removes somebody from office. If there was any law-breaking, wrongdoing, etc., 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 that's dealt with by the appropriate law enforcement agency after the individual is no longer president, Secretary of State, federal judge, whatever. Alright, so, the fun stuff. This guy is Hakeem Jeffries. He's the minority leader. I'd remember his name. This guy is Kevin McCarthy. He's the speaker. I'd remember his name. So McCarthy got 216 votes. Jeffries got 212 votes. The entire Democratic caucus was represented in that 212 votes. 6 voted present. Nobody didn't vote. So after 15 rounds in 4 days, this group of Republicans who wanted procedural and rules changes within the House gave McCarthy enough wiggle room to get elected Speaker. The 6 voting present were all Republicans. They wanted, one of the things they wanted was a rule that would allow a member to initiate a process called vacating the chair. So if they didn't think that McCarthy was doing his job as Speaker, it would only take one member to start the ball rolling on getting rid of McCarthy as Speaker. Normally that's a higher threshold, and those rules are established at the start of every new Congress. That's why if you watched any of this, the speakership election, cameras were allowed on the floor of the House. They typically aren't, but the House had no rules at that time. A rules package is typically the second thing that Congress does, but there were no rules, so there was nothing stopping those cameramen from filming individual members' conversations on the floor. It was all very interesting, really. Or maybe that's just nerd talk from, but I don't think they are still being allowed to do that. So, this was unusual. 15 rounds of voting over 4 days to elect Speaker McCarthy of California. Last time anything like that happened was 100 years ago, where the 68th Congress required 9 rounds of voting over 3 days. Now, there was an argument that Biden was making, and people in the news, the mainstream news, were making on it, that this was a big embarrassment to the country. That's an argument that you could make. Others were arguing that this was democracy in action, that our representatives were doing the right thing, doing kind of what our founders intended for us to do, arguing passionately over a very consequential decision. Because if you watched, and you should, earlier, on the next slide about what the speaker does, it's a very powerful figure, and putting the right man or woman in the job is of great consequence. So maybe that was our democratic system in action. So those were two sides of the argument. I've got some links here if you want to learn more about that particular speakership election. So what does the speaker do? Watch, please, because I'm pulling test questions from here. Very important. It's not a long video, but watch it. Please, you will regret it if you don't. So, Section 3, each state gets 2 senators. There are 3 classes of senators. A third of them are up for election every 2 years. All right. So, if there's a vacancy, the governor can fill the seat for the remainder of the term. He can just do it. He doesn't have to hold an election. I don't know if you're young or enough to remember, or old enough to remember this, but Governor Blagojevich, who was before Governor Rauner of Illinois got in trouble and went to prison because he tried to sell President Obama's Senate seat. So if there's, so you can just fill it if he so chooses. Senators must be at least 30 years old, a resident of the United States for at least 9 years, and if I can ever learn to draw on a computer, that'll be the day, and an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen. Has to live in the state. Senator from Illinois has to live in Illinois. So 30 years old, a resident of the United States for at least 9 years, and an inhabitant of that state for which he shall be chosen.